Most families lock the door behind you when you're gone. Mine handed me a set of keys to a house I built with my own two hands, and told me to be grateful I still had somewhere to go. They said I was a burden. They said it standing in my kitchen, drinking coffee out of my late wife's favorite mug, in a home they didn't even know I owned. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I nodded, packed 2 suitcases, and walked out to my old truck like a man who had nowhere left to be believed. What they didn't know was simple. I wasn't the guest in that house. I never had been. And in 11 months they were going to need my signature just to keep sleeping under that roof. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get comfortable, because this one takes its time before it pays off. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe. Here, let me back up. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 61 years old, and until 4 years ago I spent 33 years as a journeyman electrician for the same company out of Toledo, Ohio, Baxter Electric, if that name means anything to anybody watching this. I wired half the strip malls between here and Findlay. I rewired schools during the summer, when the classrooms sat empty and quiet, and I liked it that way. Quiet work, quiet life. I drive a 1994 Chevy C1500, forest green, 211,000 miles on the odometer. I've replaced one transmission and rebuilt the carburetor twice with my own hands. People ask why I don't get something newer. I tell them the truck starts every morning, and it doesn't lie to me, and that's more than I can say for some people I know. On weekends, when there's nothing else that needs doing, I restore old tube radios. Philco, Zenith, the big wooden console kind that used to sit in a living room like a piece of furniture that also happened to talk to you. I've got 14 of them working again out in my garage. There's something satisfying about taking a thing everybody else calls junk and proving it still has a voice in it, if you're patient enough to go looking for it. I am not a dramatic man. I want to say that up front, because what I'm about to tell you might sound like it came out of a movie, and I promise you, it didn't feel like one while it was happening. It felt like Tuesday, then it felt like Wednesday. It felt like 31 months of ordinary days quietly, carefully, being taken away from me one at a time. So slow I almost didn't notice until there was nothing left in my own hands. I raised one daughter, Denise, mostly on my own after my wife Ruth passed of ovarian cancer 9 years ago, in March, on a Tuesday morning at 6:14 a.m., in the bedroom of the house I'm about to tell you about. Denise is 38 now. She married a man named Craig Dunlap 14 years ago. Craig works regional sales for a company that distributes commercial HVAC parts, has a laugh you can hear 2 rooms over, and a way of making you feel like the only thing standing between him and real success is somebody else's mistake, never his. I loved my daughter more than anything on this earth. I still do. That matters, because nothing I'm about to tell you erases it. It complicates it. It doesn't erase it. The house sits at 4417 Larchmere Drive, a 3-bedroom brick ranch. I built the bones of it myself back in 1988, the year Denise was born, on a lot Ruth and I bought for $11,000, when the neighborhood was still half cornfield. I ran the electrical, I ran the plumbing, with my brother-in-law Hank, who's passed now too. Every board in that house, I know personally, the way you know the back of your own hand. I'm telling you all this so you understand something. When I say I wasn't a guest in that house, I don't mean it in some poetic way. I mean it as plain, boring fact, the kind you could look up in a county record if you knew where to look. Almost nobody did. After Ruth passed, I stayed in that house alone for 5 years. I kept her garden going, mostly out of stubbornness. Tomatoes, snap peas, a row of zinnias along the fence line she'd planted the same week Denise learned to ride a bike without training wheels. I kept her mug in the cabinet and used it every morning, and I never once told anybody that's what I was doing. Denise called me most Sundays. She'd visit with the grandkids, Mia, who was 9 then, and Jake, who was 6. Every 4th of July, I'd set up the same folding table in the backyard that Ruth and I bought the year Denise started kindergarten, and we'd grill hot dogs and watch the fireworks over the reservoir 2 streets down, close enough you didn't need to drive anywhere to see them properly. I loved those visits more than anything in my week. I want you to know that too, because it's important you understand. I wasn't a lonely, bitter old man sitting in the dark waiting for somebody to wrong me so I'd have a story to tell. I had a good, quiet life. I was content. I'd also, quietly, been setting a little aside every month since Mia was born, into a small custodial account for each of the grandkids. Nothing extravagant. $40 here, $60 there. Birthday and Christmas money that never got spent on toys but went straight into an envelope for Gary to deposit. By the time this story starts, there was a little over $11,000 sitting in each of those accounts, untouched, growing slow. Nobody but Gary and I knew that either. I mention it now because it matters later, in a way I didn't expect it to. Back in 2011, when Ruth's treatment started running past what our insurance would cover, a friend of mine from the Elks Lodge, a retired attorney named Gary Pruitt, sat me down at his kitchen table and told me something I didn't fully understand at the time. He said medical debt, if it gets bad enough, can come after a house. He said if I wanted to protect what Ruth and I built, protect it for Denise, eventually, for Mia and Jake after her, I ought to consider moving the deed out of my name personally and into a small holding company. An LLC. Larchmere Properties LLC, we called it, after the street. Gary drew up the paperwork. I signed it in his office on a Thursday afternoon in October, and I want you to remember that date, because it comes back around later. The house was never in my name after that. It was in the LLC's name, and I was the sole owner of the LLC, every bit of it. On paper, in the county recorder's office, in black and white, whether anybody in my family ever bothered to look or not. Nobody looked. Why would they? It was Dad's house. It had always been Dad's house. Nobody needed a deed to tell them that. In the spring 4 years ago, Denise called me on a Sunday night, and I could hear in her voice she'd been crying. Craig had lost a big commission when his company restructured his territory, cut it almost in half. Money was tight. Their rent on the townhouse over in Perrysburg was going up $210 a month at renewal, and between that and Mia starting braces and Jake needing a new travel soccer fee every season, they were stretched thin. She asked, careful. The way you ask when you already know what you're about to ask is a big thing. Whether they might stay with me for a while, just to get back on their feet, just for a season or two. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Of course I said yes. That's my daughter. That's my grandkids. I had 4 empty bedrooms and a house too quiet for one man, and 2 radios that didn't need the company nearly as much as I did. They moved in that June, and for a while, I want to be honest with you because fair is fair, for a while it was good. Mia and Jake filled that house with a kind of noise I hadn't heard since Denise was their age. Craig helped me clean the gutters that first weekend, and we grilled out on the back patio, and I thought, well, maybe this is exactly what all of us needed. I gave them the 2 bedrooms down the hall, the ones that used to be Denise's and the guest room. I told them, don't worry about paying me anything. Get yourselves stable first. That's what a father does. I want you to hold on to that memory of the good months, because it's going to make what comes next land harder. It should. That's how it actually felt to live through. It started small enough that I almost couldn't tell you the exact day it started, which I've come to understand is exactly how these things are designed to work. The first thing was the garage. Craig needed a place for what he called his home gym setup. A squat rack, some dumbbells, a rowing machine he got second-hand off a listing app, and he asked, reasonable enough, whether I could clear out some space. I moved 4 of my radios into the spare bedroom closet to make room. No harm in it. I told myself that. Then it was the mail. About 2 months in, I noticed packages arriving, addressed to Craig and Denise Dunlap, 4417 Larchmere Drive. Not unusual, they lived there. But then I noticed Craig's new business cards, the ones he'd had printed up for his sales route, listed that same address as his office. Then Denise switched her voter registration. Then a letter came from the county assessor addressed to current resident, and Craig opened it before I even got to the mailbox, because he said he'd started handling the household stuff to take some of the load off me. I let that one go too. I told myself I was being petty even noticing it. By the fall, Craig had started referring to rooms in my house, with a kind of ownership in his voice, that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Not your office, but the office. Not your garage, but my gym. Small words. I've rewired enough houses to know that a short in the wall doesn't announce itself all at once either. It just gets a little warmer, a little at a time, until one day something catches fire that nobody saw building. Around that same time, Craig asked me, casual, over dinner, whether it might make things simpler if he were added as an authorized user on my checking account, just for emergencies, just in case anything ever happened to me and somebody needed to pay a bill quickly. I told him I appreciated the thought, but I'd rather keep that simple the way it already was. He didn't push it, not that night. But I noticed, 3 days later, an email from my bank sitting unread in my inbox, a notification that someone had attempted to log into my account from a device I didn't recognize, and been blocked for failing the security questions. I never brought it up with him. I just changed my password and made a note of the date in a little spiral notebook I'd started keeping in my nightstand drawer, the same notebook that, without my knowing it yet, was going to end up being one of the more useful things I owned. That December, Denise had a photographer come out for Christmas cards. The whole family posed in front of the fireplace I'd built the mantel for out of reclaimed barnwood the same summer Jake was born. I was in the picture, technically. Off to the side, half a step back, the way you'd position a favorite uncle rather than the man who owned the walls around everyone in the frame. I heard Denise tell a neighbor stopping by to drop off cookies, cheerful and offhand. "Oh, that's my dad. He's staying with us for a while." Staying with us. In my own house. I smiled for the photo. I didn't correct her. Not yet. The line came in October, on a Sunday, the 17th. I remember because it was the day after my own birthday. I'd left a pot of chili on the stove a little too long while I went out to check on a radio I had drying in the garage, and it scorched, set off the smoke detector in the hallway, filled the kitchen with smoke and noise. Nothing damaged, nothing dangerous. Just an old man who got distracted, the way people do. Craig came storming in from the living room, waved a dish towel at the detector to shut it off, and looked at me, not with worry, with irritation, the kind you'd give a stranger who'd inconvenienced you. And he said, to Denise, not even to me, like I wasn't standing right there, "This is what I mean. He's becoming a burden." I want you to sit with that phrase for a second, the way I had to sit with it, standing in my own kitchen, smoke still hanging near the ceiling, my late wife's mug still on the counter where I'd set it down 20 minutes before. He's becoming a burden. Not "Dad, are you okay?" Not "Let's get a timer for the stove." Just an assessment, flat and final, delivered like a man closing out a spreadsheet. Denise didn't say anything. That hurt worse than Craig's words did, if I'm honest with you. She just looked at the floor. I didn't say anything either. I opened the window over the sink, let the smoke out, and I went back out to the garage. That's when I made the first quiet decision of this whole story. Not yet, I told myself. Not yet. Over the following months, the phrase didn't come back word for word, but the shape of it did. Again and again, dressed up in different clothes. Craig started saying it to other people too. His mother Sherry, who visited at Thanksgiving, said to me directly, sipping wine at my own dining table, "Honestly, Walter, at your age, rattling around a house this size alone would be so much harder on you than people realize." It's a blessing, really, that Craig and Denise are here to keep an eye on things. I sat there and I let her say it, because I've learned that people show you exactly who they are if you're quiet enough to let them keep talking. There was a night in January that I still think about more than almost anything else that happened that whole stretch. Craig had a work event, a regional sales dinner 2 hours south, and his leased truck was in the shop for a recall repair, so he asked to borrow mine. I said yes, same as I always said yes to nearly everything back then. He brought it back after midnight with a long scrape down the passenger side, paint transfer from somebody's guardrail or another car, he wasn't entirely clear which, and a dent in the tailgate that hadn't been there that morning. He apologized, sort of, said he'd get it looked at, said, "It's an old truck anyway, Walter, it's not like it's worth much." I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that the truck had never once let me down in 31 years, and I couldn't say the same about the man standing in front of me. I never did get that scrape fixed. It's still there today if you ever see the truck in person. I kind of like it there now. It reminds me what I was dealing with, and what I decided to do about it instead of losing my temper over a piece of sheet metal. Craig had another phrase he liked, one he used almost every time he moved something of mine without asking, or repainted a room I hadn't agreed to have repainted, or told the grandkids a rule about the house that I hadn't set. "It's fine," he'd say to Denise, to himself, sometimes right to my face with a little smile like he was doing me a favor. He won't even notice. He said it when he moved 8 of my remaining radios out of the spare room and into a storage unit across town, a unit I was now paying $81 a month for, to make room for what he called Jake's gaming setup. He said it when he had a landscaping company repave part of the driveway without asking, then handed me an invoice for $600, split 50-50, since we all use it. He said it when he switched the homeowner's insurance provider, using information from paperwork in my own filing cabinet, because he'd found a policy $60 a year cheaper, and put himself down as the primary contact on the account. He won't even notice. I noticed every single time. I have 33 years of noticing things other people assume are too small to matter, because in my old line of work, the small thing you don't notice is the thing that burns the house down. The driveway invoice, in particular, stuck with me longer than it probably should have. $600, split 50-50, he said, and he'd already told the paving crew to send the bill straight to me, addressed to Walter Briggs, homeowner, which struck me as almost funny given everything else. I paid it without a word. 3 weeks later I noticed Craig's truck, a newer one than mine, something he'd leased the year before, had new tires on it, 4 of them, the good all-terrain kind that run close to $1,000 installed. I never asked where that money came from. I didn't need to. I just wrote it down in the spiral notebook, next to the date, the way I'd learned to do with everything by then. By that second winter, they had stopped asking me before making decisions about the house entirely. Christmas dinner was hosted, but I was informed of the menu rather than asked. My grandson's birthday party moved to the backyard without a conversation about it. And in January, Craig sat me down, in my own living room, like I was the one who needed to be brought up to speed, and told me that he and Denise had been talking to a financial advisor, and that given the family's overall financial picture, it might make sense to explore a home equity line of credit against the house, to help cover some debt Craig had quietly built up on 2 credit cards, and to put a down payment on what he called an investment property, 2 towns over. I asked him, calm as I could manage, how exactly he planned to take out a loan against a house he didn't own. He laughed, not unkindly at first. He said, "Come on, Walter, it's basically ours at this point anyway, you know that." And when I didn't laugh along with him, his face changed, just slightly, into something colder. "Denise is your only daughter. This house is going to be hers eventually regardless. I'm just talking about being practical now instead of later." I told him I'd think about it. I did not think about it. What I did instead, the following Tuesday, was drive out to Gary Pruitt's office for the first time in years and lay the whole thing out on his desk, plain as I could manage without my voice shaking. That's the midpoint of the road here, and if you've stayed with me this far, do me one favor, hit subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it means a lot to me that you're still here. Gary listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always respected about him. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, took his glasses off and said, "Walter, has anybody in that house ever asked to see the deed?" Nobody had. Not once, in 3.5 years. Gary pulled the actual county record up on his computer, right there in front of me, same as anybody could have done from a public library computer any day of the week. Larchmere Properties, LLC. Sole member, sole manager, Walter Briggs. Filed October the 14th, 13 years earlier. Nothing had changed. Nothing had ever changed. My daughter and her husband had spent 3.5 years living, rent-free, in a house owned outright by a company that existed entirely because I, once, quietly, protected it for exactly a situation I never imagined would look like this one. Gary also pulled something else up, something that turned my stomach a little. 3 weeks earlier, an inquiry had been logged with a regional credit union, a home equity application, in Craig Dunlap's name, using 4417 Larchmere Drive as the collateral property. It had been declined within 48 hours, automatically, the moment the underwriter ran a title search and found an LLC on record that Craig had no legal standing with whatsoever. He'd never told me it was declined. He'd never told me he'd applied at all. I sat in Gary's office for a long while that afternoon, not saying much. I want to be honest with you about what I felt, because it wasn't triumph, not yet. It was grief, mostly. Grief for the 4 good months back at the start, for the man who grilled out on my patio and helped clean my gutters, for whatever version of my daughter's husband I had briefly let myself believe was decent all the way through. Then Gary asked me the question that changed the shape of everything. "Walter," he said, "what do you actually want out of this?" I thought about it longer than he probably expected, and what I landed on wasn't revenge, not in the way the word usually gets used. What I landed on was this. I wanted them to know the truth, and I wanted the truth to come with consequences that were fair, documented, and entirely legal. I didn't want to scream at anybody. I didn't want to throw anybody's things out on the lawn in the middle of the night. I am not a dramatic man. I wanted paperwork. Paperwork doesn't lie, and it doesn't forget, and it doesn't care how loud your laugh is, or how good you are at making other people feel small. Over the following 6 weeks, I did 5 things, quietly, one at a time. First, I had Gary formally document the property, confirming Larchmere Properties LLC as sole owner, with me as sole member, everything airtight and dated, pulling every filing back to that Thursday afternoon in October 13 years earlier, so there wasn't a single gap anyone could point to later. Second, I drove downtown myself, in the truck, and sat across a desk from an insurance agent named Priya Malhotra, who I'd never met before in my life. And I asked her a plain question. If the owner of a property no longer lived there full-time, what would that mean for the policy? She didn't even have to look it up. A property occupied by non-owners requires a landlord policy, not a homeowner's policy, she told me, and it requires a documented lease establishing the terms of occupancy, along with proof of renter's insurance carried by the occupants. Without one, she said, in the event of a claim, a fire, a burst pipe, somebody slipping on the front step, the policy could be voided entirely, and the owner could be left holding all of it himself. I thanked her, shook her hand, and drove home with something in my chest I hadn't felt in 2 years. Not anger, just clarity. That single insurance requirement, not any anger of mine, was about to force a conversation my family couldn't avoid, or spin their way out of. Third, I had the property formally appraised. A man named Russ Kowalski came out on a Wednesday morning, walked the whole house with a clipboard, while Denise was at work and Craig was on the road for a sales call, measured every room, took photographs, and 2 weeks later sent Gary a fair market rental value of $1,900 a month, comparable to 3 other brick ranches within half a mile that had rented out that same year. I kept that report folded in the glove box of my truck for a while, like it was something I needed close by to believe it was real. Fourth, I quietly found myself a small 1-bedroom apartment on the far side of town, on Chestnut Ridge Road, month to month, $615, with a little balcony that got the afternoon sun. I drove out on a Saturday when everyone thought I was at the hardware store, walked the unit twice, and put down a deposit before I let myself second-guess it. I didn't tell anybody I was looking. I paid the deposit out of my own savings, the same account Craig didn't know existed, the one that had accumulated slow and steady over 33 years of a union electrician's paycheck and never once needed touching. Fifth, and this was the hardest one, I waited for them to make the decision for me. I didn't want to be the one who announced I was leaving. I wanted them to ask. Gary told me that afternoon in his office, folding his hands on the desk. Walter, most men in your position would want to hurry this along. You don't seem to. I told him I wasn't in any hurry to be right. I was only interested in being ready. There's a difference, and it took me most of 61 years to learn it. Somewhere in the middle of that 6 weeks, Mia found me out in the garage one evening, working on a Zenith cabinet, and she sat on the old stool by the workbench the way she used to when she was small enough that her feet didn't reach the floor. She was 14 by then, sharp the way her grandmother had been sharp, and she asked me, out of nowhere, whether I was happy. I told her I was working on being happy, which was as honest an answer as I could give a 14-year-old. She said she'd noticed things had gotten different in the house, that her dad seemed to talk about me like I was somebody who needed managing, instead of somebody who was just her grandpa. I didn't put any of what was coming onto her shoulders. I just told her that grown-up things sometimes take a while to sort themselves out fairly, and that whatever happened, none of it was ever going to change how much I loved her and her brother. She hugged me before she went back inside, and I sat out there a long while after, listening to the old tubes hum warm, thinking that whatever else came of all this, I still had that. I didn't have to wait long after that. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening in late February, Denise and Craig sat me down again in my own living room, the same spot where he'd once pitched me on a home equity loan against a house he didn't own. This time, Denise did most of the talking, and I could tell it had been rehearsed, the careful, gentle phrasing of it, the way you'd break bad news to someone you loved but had already decided about. She said they'd been thinking about what's really best for everyone long term. She said the house felt tight, with all of us in it. She said Craig's mother had actually looked into a very nice independent living community over near St. Vincent's, 1 bedroom, meals included, other men my age to talk to, and that they'd already put my name on a short waiting list, just in case. She said it would honestly probably be good for me, less to manage, less to worry about. Craig didn't say much. He mostly just nodded along, and near the end, when I asked, plainly, whether this was actually about what was best for me or about the house, he shrugged and said the same 6 words I had heard in different shapes for 2 years running. "It's fine, Walter, you'll adjust. You always do." I looked at my daughter for a long moment. She wouldn't quite meet my eyes. I told them I understood. I told them I'd already been thinking it might be time for a change too, which wasn't a lie, just not the kind of change they were picturing. I told them I'd be out within the month. They looked relieved. I want you to notice that. Relieved. If you've made it this far, thank you. One more small thing. Hit that like button before we get to the part you've been waiting for. I moved out on a Saturday in March, exactly the way I told you at the start. 2 suitcases. A box of Ruth's things I couldn't leave behind. My good radio, the 1948 Zenith console I'd finished restoring the year before, riding wrapped in a moving blanket in the bed of my truck. Nobody helped me carry anything out except Jake, who was 10 now, and who hugged me by the tailgate and asked, quiet, so his parents wouldn't hear, if I was going to be okay. I told him I was going to be just fine, and for the first time in a long while, I actually believed it when I said it. I settled into the little apartment on Chestnut Ridge Road. I set the Zenith up by the window where the afternoon light hit it. And then I let 2 months pass, quiet, patient, ordinary months, while, unbeknownst to anyone at 4417 Larchmere Drive, Gary Pruitt and I finished the paperwork that was going to change the entire shape of my family's understanding of who actually held the keys. In late April, the letter went out. Not from me, from Larchmere Properties, LLC, on legal letterhead, delivered by certified mail, and, out of a fairness I still felt I owed them, hand-delivered by Gary himself, so nobody could claim later they'd never seen it. It informed Craig and Denise Dunlap that the property at 4417 Larchmere Drive was owned by Larchmere Properties, LLC, that their continued occupancy without a lease was no longer compliant with the property's insurance requirements, and that in order to remain in the residence, a formal month-to-month residential lease would need to be signed within 30 days, at fair market rent for the area, which Gary had a licensed appraiser document at $1,900 a month. I heard about the reaction secondhand, from Denise, who called me that same evening in a state I hadn't heard her in since she was a teenager. She said Craig had gone pale reading it at the kitchen table. She said he'd made 3 phone calls trying to find a lawyer who could tell him the letter was some kind of mistake, and every single one had told him the same thing Gary already knew. The title was clean, the LLC was legitimate, and no, there was no path to challenging it that wouldn't cost him more in legal fees than the rent itself. I agreed to meet them, not alone, with Gary beside me, in the conference room at his office, the following Tuesday, the way you handle any piece of business that matters. They came in together, Denise first, Craig a step behind her with a manila folder he never actually opened. The conference room was small, just a rectangular table and a window looking out over the parking lot, and I remember thinking how strange it was that a room that plain could be about to hold something so big. Gary laid the LLC documents on the table, the deed, the insurance requirement letter, the appraisal, and the draft lease, calm as reading off a grocery list. I watched Craig's eyes move down the page to the line that said Landlord, Walter R. Briggs, on behalf of Larchmere Properties, LLC, and I watched something in his face fold in on itself, slow, the way a building looks right before it actually starts to come down. This has to be some kind of mistake, he said, more to Gary than to me, tapping the page with one finger like tapping it harder might change what it said. There's no way. We would have known. Denise would have known. Gary, patient as ever, slid the original 2011 filing across the table, and then the county recorder's printout, dated that same week, current as of Monday. It's a matter of public record, Mr. Dunlap, he said. It has been for 13 years. Craig looked at Denise. Denise looked at me. She said my name, just Dad, soft, and I could hear in it every version of the question underneath it. How long did you know? Why didn't you tell us? Were you always going to do this? I answered the only version of it I actually owed her an answer to. I've known since before you were married, I told her. It was never a secret I was keeping from you, sweetheart. It's just a piece of paper that nobody ever thought to ask about. Craig looked up at me and, out of habit more than anything else I think, tried the same line one more time, quieter this time, almost a question instead of a dismissal. Walter, come on. You're not really going to do this. I let the room stay quiet for a second before I answered him. Then I said, You told me I'd adjust. I did. I let that sit. Now it's your turn. I told them the truth, plainly, the way I'd rehearsed it in my head 100 times on the drive over. I told them I loved my daughter and my grandchildren, without any condition attached to it, and that would never change. I told them the lease terms were fair, market rate, nothing punitive, because I never wanted to punish anyone. I only ever wanted the truth back in the room. I told them they were welcome to sign it and stay, or welcome to decline, and I'd give them 90 days, more than legally required, to find somewhere else. Either way, the decision from here forward would be made honestly, on paper, by adults, instead of quietly, in the dark, by someone who assumed an old man wouldn't notice. Denise cried, quietly, into a tissue Gary kept a box of on the credenza for exactly this kind of meeting. Craig didn't say much at all after that. He read through the lease twice, line by line, looking for something to object to, and found nothing, because Gary had built it fair on purpose. Market rate, no punitive clauses, a standard 60-day notice period either direction, nothing designed to trap them, only to make the arrangement honest. At one point he asked, quiet, almost embarrassed, whether the rent might start a little lower for the first few months, just to help us catch up. I looked at him for a long moment, thought about the tires, the driveway, the credit union inquiry he'd never once mentioned to me, and I said, The appraisal's fair, Craig. I'm not looking to make this hard on you. I'm looking to make it honest. He nodded and didn't ask again. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon in Gary's office, both of their signatures went down on a month-to-month residential lease for the house I built the bones of back in 1988, the year my daughter was born, with my name printed above the word landlord. These days I still live in the little apartment on Chestnut Ridge Road, and I've come to like it more than I expected to. The rent from Larchmere Drive covers it twice over, with plenty left besides, and once a month it lands in an account that used to just sit there quietly, the way I used to sit there quietly, not asking for much, not expecting much either. I put the surplus, every bit of it, straight into those 2 custodial accounts I told you about earlier, the ones for Mia and Jake. Mia turns 18 in 2 years, and when she does, there's going to be a good deal more than $11,000 waiting for her, and she's going to know exactly where every dollar of it came from and why. Denise and I talk most Sundays again, slower than before, more careful, but real. She brings the kids by sometimes, and Jake likes to sit with me while I work on whatever radio's on the bench, handing me tools like he's the apprentice and I'm still the journeyman, which I suppose, in a way, I am. Mia comes on her own now sometimes, on the bus, just to sit on that same stool and talk. Craig and I are polite. That's the honest word for it, polite. He pays the rent on the 1st of every month, on time, every time, and we've never once raised our voices at each other since that afternoon in Gary's office. Some bridges you rebuild all the way. Some you just keep standing enough to walk across when you have to. I've made my peace with both kinds. Some men don't look powerful. They keep the same old truck. They fix radios nobody wants anymore. They let a room stay quiet instead of proving a point out loud. But quiet isn't the same thing as harmless. And the people who mix the two up always find that out eventually, usually right around the time they need somebody's signature on the dotted line. If this one landed for you, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I'll see you on the next one.